So we are now in episode number 6. And this will be the final episode of this series of Amos, Let Justice Roll. If you remember these past 5 episodes, it was all about the children of Israel and how jacked up they was in not following what God told them to do. I mean, there was a show that I ain't going to go to that. They were just awful. It was just whatever they could do wrong, they continued to do it just because they could. Last week we even talked about they was in church service thinking about how they could be deceptive and deceiving to one another and how they could just do it the way that they wanted to do it because that is the way they wanted to do it. And when at the end we found out that God said, I am going to judge them for what they've done. Bless you. That I'm going to judge them for what they've done. God said, I'm going to judge them for what they did. This time I ain't playing. He said, I'm coming. And so, as we see, if you look through history, you'll see how the nation of Israel got wiped out and decimated, and the little nation of Judah got to live, I think, probably about 100 to 200 more years longer as a country, but Israel did so bad. It did so bad. But the thing is, what we're going to look at today is we're going to be in Amos, the 9th chapter, the 11th through the 15th verses. Then we're going to jump over to Luke, the 15th chapter, and look at a couple of those scriptures starting at the 11th verse. One of the points about this is this, that despite the people's selfishness, God never changed his mind about sending salvation through his son Jesus. They just couldn't be so awful that he would refrain from sending the Savior. But they was pretty bad now. Don't get it twisted. There was some roughing up junkers. They did not do well at all. So as we see here in the ninth chapter, the 11th verse, he says, in that day I will raise up the booth of David that is fallen, and repair its breaches, and raise up its ruins, and rebuild it as in the days of old. When you're doing the study this week, as you're looking at this, you'll see the scriptures before where God says, I'm just going to totally decimate them. It's not going to be nothing left. And then, see, God like a good parent. You know, you get a whooping, then you go back in there, he say, come here, baby. You know I had to whoop you, right? And you'll be like, don't be talking to me like that. You ain't my friend right now. You just whooped me. But that's how God is. After we done went through 9 chapters of him talking about how I'm going to get him. I'm going to just get him. I'm going to get him. I'm going to get him. And then as he closed out the book, he said, I'm going to take care of him. Isn't that how he do it? No matter how crazy. Last week I talked about us being brain damaged. No matter how damaged our brains are, he still brings about the promise. My goodness. My goodness. So after he done said all that, then he gonna say, okay, bless you. There's a day coming, after all this, after they're decimated, that I'm going to restore, I'm going to raise up the booth of David, the tabernacle of David. Remember, David is the promised king. David is the representation of how God wanted a king to be. David was a warrior. David was a worshiper. David was the apple of God's eye. Now, that didn't mean David didn't have no baggage, but he just knew how to maintain his relationship with God. So he said, in that day I will raise up the booth of David that is fallen. I'm going to repair all the holes, the breaches, everything that's wrong with it. I'm going to raise up its ruins and rebuild it as in the days of old, as it was before, when David was the ruler, how everything was then. I'm going to bring that back. And they that possess the remnant of Edom, and all the nations who are called by my name, declares the Lord who does this. Not only is he going to bring them back, but he's going to give them the ability to overcome and get all the land that he promised them from the beginning. Bad kids, and they still getting blessed. Bad. He says, what's that, 13th verse? He says, behold, the days are coming, declared the Lord, when the plowman shall overtake the reaper, and the treader of grapes him who sows the seed. The mountains shall drip sweet wine, and all the hills shall flow with it. Let me explain to y'all what this means. He's saying that everything is going to be so bountiful this time, is that when the plowman comes to do the land, to get it ready to plant, they still going to be harvesting stuff because it was so much. So what he's saying is it's going to take seasons in order to return, to pull in all the harvest. It's just going to be a time of abundance. You sitting there trying to come out there with the plow, you can't even do it. Man, would you finish getting the rest of the grapes? Would you finish getting the rest of the... Come on, I got to do my part. But it's just going to be so abundant. And he says, the treader of grapes who sows the seed, the mountains shall drip sweet wine, and all the hills shall flow with it. It's going to be so many grapes that the grapes are going to just start falling on the ground. There's going to be so many grapes falling on the ground. As you're picking them, they're going to be stepping on them, creating wine. Now, I wouldn't drink that wine because it's going to be a little dirty. But my fact is, it's just going to be so abundant. Them bad people. Them knuckleheads. Brain damage. He says, I will restore the fortunes of my people Israel. And they shall rebuild the ruined cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink their wine. And they shall make gardens and eat their fruit. It's just going to be such a blessing. Bad kids. Hard heads. He says, I will plant them on their land, and they shall never again be uprooted out of the land that I have given them, saith the Lord our God. And this is where we're going to spend a couple minutes. God is saying, I'm going to plant them, and ain't nobody going to be able to uproot them. Now we know AD 70, the Romans came in and did all that to them, and they got dispersed all throughout Europe and all this. But after World War II, 1947, matter of fact, everybody started migrating back to Israel. 1948, the United Nations decided to acknowledge Israel as a nation. Israel was probably about this big, and all the Arab countries around it was about this big. Yeah. This little bit of pieces of people in the midst of all this. As soon as the United Nations declared that they were going to be a nation, the Arabs said, no, that ain't going to happen. We're going to obliterate them. We're going to destroy the whole Jewish line. So they said, we're going to war. They went to war, and that little old bitty country beat up all of them. Beat them up to the point the Israelis was able to take land that was theirs from the promise from the beginning of Canaan, been able to take that. What kind of nonsense is this? Read the scripture. God just said, he said, I will plant them on their land. On their land. And they shall never again be uprooted out of the land that I have given them. All right. Says the Lord your God. Yeah. God said, I done said this now. Right. When I plant them, they're going to be planted. Now check this out. If y'all don't know, Israel is in the middle of the desert. If you didn't know. You ain't supposed to be able to grow nothing in the desert. But for some reason, when they start planting, stuff started growing.
Come on with it.
I don't understand how people can't believe it's a God. When you in the middle of the desert, everybody around you planting, ain't nothing growing. You plant, and it starts growing. Now let me tell you something though. Let's see. This is the like Paul Harvey said. This is the rest of the story. You know that most of the people that are in Israel don't believe in God.
That's right. That's true.
What you say?
They're not religious Jews, the people in Israel.
Isn't that something?
Ain't that something?
Thank you, Miss Linda.
I know that for a fact.
Yeah, I'm helping you, girl. Help me. That's what I'm talking about. They do not believe in God.
No.
But guess what? They still the chosen ones.
That's right.
This goes to show us even today that once God has put his hand on you, once God has chosen you, ain't nothing you can do. Ain't nothing that you can do. Ain't nothing you can do. David said, if I ascend up into the highest of skies, you there. If I try to hide in the lowest, deepest points of hell, you there. Where can I go from your presence? Nowhere. And once you're chosen, you're chosen. Ain't nothing you can do about it. God says, I'll plant them on their land. Now, it really wasn't their land from the beginning. When God had them leave Egypt, he said, go to the land. Wait a minute, let's go a little bit further back. When God talked to Abraham and told him to leave his family, he says, go to the land I'll tell you of. But there was already some folks living there. But when Abraham showed up, he kicked them off of it. This is how bad God was. Him and Abraham is. I can hit this history real quick. He had his nephew Lot with him, right? And they're standing up there, and their herds and everything had grew to the point that they were like, we can't stay together like this. We need to separate. So Abraham said, Lot, you tell me where you want to go, and you can have that land. Lot said, oh, look at that. There's a water over there. That looks like it's bountiful. It looks like it's got everything. I'm going to go over there. So Lot went over there. Lot going along, God taps Abraham on the shoulder and says, Abraham. He says, yes, Lord. He said, I want you to look to the west. He looks to the west. He said, I want you to look to the north. He looks to the north. He said, I want you to look to the east. He looks to the east. And he says, I want you to look to the south. That's where Lot was going. He said, all this is yours. But wait a minute. Even what? All this is yours. So that's how far back this goes. It was occupied by somebody else, but if God designates it for you, guess what? When you show up, they got to do like this. They got to move. You know what I'm saying? That's how God set up. So this is even before the Egyptian campaign.
Right.
This is way before all that. God had already established this land as theirs. Y'all remember Abraham, right?
Yes.
Abraham was an old guy who said, I can't have no children because I'm old. My wife is old. I don't know what you're talking about, God. He said, but if you say it's going to happen, I'm going to believe it's going to happen. Sarah wasn't like that. Sarah was like, nah, I'm too old to be having no children. Ended up having a baby. You know what his name was? Isaac. You know why he called him Isaac? Because when Sarah received a promise, she laughed. So this was a reminder to Sarah, this is what you laughed about. And that's exactly what God does. God says, and he sets up things, and he provides reminders for us so that we can go forward and know that he is true to his word. He's true to his word. Now, you know what? I need to go back a little bit further. Can I go back just a little bit further?
Go ahead.
There was this guy. His name was Adam. And he had a helpmeet. Her name was Adam. And they was walking through, and everything was going all well and all beautiful. And then one day, Adam messed up. Adam messed up, transpired against the will of God because he ate the fruit that God told him not to eat. Now y'all looking at the video, you're gonna be talking about what about the Eve ate first. We ain't worried about Eve. It said that Eve was deceived. Adam made a choice. I'm talking about I'm doing my thing for the visiting now. Okay, but anyway, what God did though, see, this is what God did. He did not destroy them. Even then, did not destroy them. He removed them from the garden because if they would have eaten of the tree of life, they would not be able to die, so they wouldn't have been able to be redeemed. So he said, I got to protect them from themselves, and I got to set up a block. They got kicked out of the garden because God didn't trust them not to eat the fruit of the tree of life.
Okay.
Because God even said, he said, now they have reasoning abilities just like we do. So we need to remove them because that is a transgression against what I told them to do. But guess what? It says that God then took some animals, killed the animals, which was a sacrifice, clothed them, and then he kicked them out. Well, ain't that something? You get in so much trouble. Then the guy says, well, you know, you're in trouble, but here's a couple of dollars so you can get on your way. Still took care of them. Still did for them. This is how God does business. Once he has put his hand upside your big, fat, brain damaged head,
That's good.
he will not let you go.
Let you go.
You can do what you want to. Ask Jonah what happened to him. I had my notes and my laptop and clothes all off my notes, but ask Jonah what happened. He said, go here. Jonah said, I'm going there. Jonah didn't realize if you do not fulfill your mission in God, you're going to be incomplete. You will fulfill your purpose. And guess what happened? He fulfilled it until he got spit up out by that fish. Let me get back to my notes, y'all. See, y'all done got me all excited. I'm blaming y'all. When God pronounced his final word, when God pronounced his judgment on Israel, it was not his final word. It was his judgment, but it was not his final. He wasn't giving up on it. And he hasn't changed, and he's not going back on his promise. Now, as you do a review of this and you go through the book of Amos, you could be a little bit discouraged. Because them jokes, like I said, they just messed up constantly. It just appears that they just wanted to be mess ups. You know, they mistreated everybody that they should have been treating well. They didn't follow God's direction on how to live and be an example to the rest of the nations. But then God says, you know what? I'm going to plan Israel again. And ain't nobody else going to be able to uproot it. Now, this is one of the things I used to, when your family lives by a standard, sometimes it's better to not look at everybody else and compare how you live and how they live. We had this expression in the house. Anybody else can, but a Pender can't. That was the setup. Daddy, can we say everybody else can, Penders can't. And you be like, man, they still get to do, and you thinking all that's all good and gravy and all that other stuff. God, yet still. Same with us. God, why can't I? Why can't I? Instead of looking at, wow, God, you open up the doors. You're doing all this for me. You're opening up so many things for me to do. And the one thing, God, how come I can't do that? What? And he like, you got all these things over here. Isn't that something? Let me tell you about my little sister. My little sister every Christmas got a whooping. She got a whooping almost every Christmas. I wish she was here because I'd make her tell it. My little sister would get more gifts than anybody else and still would have wanted something else.
Really?
Yeah, that's how she did business. I mean, it's the family tradition now. Christmas time, even when she grown, we start looking at her and see if she gonna say something. But every Christmas, and that's how, when we're in Christ, sometimes that's how our mentality becomes. God says, I got all this over here for you. All this is for you. And you look over here, but I want that.
Help us, Lord.
I don't want it. And you go over there and there's nothing.
Nothing. Grass ain't green.
Goes just like that.
Ain't green at all.
We had an expression in the Army. You know how they say that the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence? We used to say that's because it's a septic tank. Y'all know what happens if you jump? Okay, I ain't gonna get into that. Y'all know what a septic tank is, right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Just so you understand. I just want to hit y'all with that one. As we look at this, there's another story in the New Testament that I want to correlate with this. And that'll take us over to Luke, the 15th chapter. Now, I'm not going to go through all the scriptures. I'm just going to go through the story because I want to give you an opportunity to read it for yourself. But it's a familiar story for us that have been around church folks. The actual title for the Luke, the 15th chapter, starting with the 11th verse, is Jesus telling this parable about this family. The father has two sons. And the youngest son walks up to his father and says, give me my inheritance now. I want to go ahead and spend my money. Now, most modern day translations of that would have been, and after he picked himself off the floor because the dad smacked him so hard, his mind got right and he went on back out there and went to work. But that ain't what happened with this situation. This situation the father gave him. Now, let me help you to understand. The way that the Jewish tradition was, the firstborn received 2/3 of what the father had. The other third was divided by all the remaining siblings. Okay? So, he gets 1/3 of his father's inheritance, or his father's wealth at that time. The Bible says that he goes out, makes some friends. His friends helped him to spend his money.
Oh, yeah.
And,
They're good for that.
you know, I was getting ready to say that, you know, when folks see that you got a couple of dollars or see a couple of things that came your way, they'll be your friend so quick. They'll tell everybody that you their friend in, won't they? But let's say you call them and say, you know what, I'm a couple of dollars short on the situation. Can you help me out? And next thing you hear is crickets.
That's right.
They'll act like they that voice. The number you have reached is no longer in service. If you think you have reached this number in error, please hang up and dial again. That's how they'll treat you. But this young man, he got caught up and lost all the money. 1/3 of his father's inheritance, he lost it all. Had to go find himself a job. Now, I want to show you how desperate he was. He's Jewish, correct?
Okay.
Jewish have a law of clean and unclean that they have to follow, correct?
Yes.
He has to go work with the thing that is the most unclean thing in the Jewish law, which is pigs.
Right.
He has to go work with the pigs. And it says he starts eating what the pigs are eating
Yes.
because he's in such a low estate. Then, as you read in there, you'll see where it says this simple thing. He came to himself. Now, when I hear that, I think of this as like he had this out-of-body experience where he's walking around and he's now looking at himself saying, you know you can be doing better than this. You know your father's servants do way better than this. He gets the eureka idea. I'm going to go become my father's servant. Because I've done all this dirt, I can't be a son. So he heads back. And as you're reading this, you'll see the part where it says, and the father saw him afar off. So what does that tell you? The father's been looking for him.
Looking for.
The father's been watching for him. The father's been hoping
Come on.
that his son would go out there and return to him safely.
Yeah.
He's been, and then it says, the father ran up to the son and embraced the son and started kissing on the son. And the son trying to tell him, he said, Father, I can't. But he's like, oh, so glad to see you. He's like, you know, he had his little speech, you know, he walking. Well, I'm going to just tell him I'm not able. But the father was so glad to see him. And he says, we're going to have a party. He said, we're going to celebrate. He says, my son who was lost is now found.
Hallelujah.
Isn't that something? That Amos was trying to get these folks to see. You done asked God for all these blessings, and you're going out and did all this craziness with it. All he wants you to do is turn and come back.
Come back.
Just come on back. Whatever you've done, come on back. We will restore you. We will redeem you. Anything that is wrong, we will help you. Come on back. And I just want y'all to know today is that this is how God does business. Whatever you think you can do to disqualify yourself from being God's child, it ain't good enough to disqualify you.
That's right.
Amen.
You can, whatever you think you could do, you can't disqualify. He set it up so that when he became Jesus and walked this earth, he took every transgression that you have done and he laid the responsibility of that on Jesus, and Jesus took the penalty of that, which was death. Now, because I'm getting into my Easter message now, because the enemy thought that he was going to be able to destroy God by doing this, he allowed it to happen. But what he didn't know is that when the transgression is placed upon someone that is innocent of the transgression, it nullifies the penalty of the transgression.
Amen.
So Jesus took us that were guilty, he became us as it pertains to our transgressions, stood in front of the judge, received the penalty for it, which was death. But then once all the dust settled, it was like, well, he just nullified all the transgression because he was innocent. So because he did that, that actually made us innocent because it's already paid for.
Thank you, God.
Y'all not catching
Thank
it?
you.
Y'all not catching it? It's done. And check this out. It's not for just this moment. When he said it is finished, when he was on the cross, he was saying in a present perfect tense, which means it is constantly still happening.
Amen.
So for the transgression that you're going to commit today, he's already paid the penalty.
Amen.
That's why he says, if you come to me and ask for forgiveness, I will give it to you. I will cleanse you of all unrighteousness.
Thank you, God.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lord. Just for me.
Genesis, the 3rd chapter. We see what we call today a come to Jesus meeting. And what a come to Jesus meeting means is that everybody getting ready to get called in and we're going to get this thing fixed. What had happened was that the proprietor of the property and his helpmeet had violated the rules. And they had to come before the judge. And when the proprietor came before, the man came before, he said, "It's the woman that you gave me." Now, I could dig into this a little bit deeper, but you telling God that it's his fault because of what he gave you, I don't think that would really hold up, but he tried. He tried. He then looked at the woman, and the woman said, "It was the serpent that beguiled me." The serpent looked around and said, "I ain't got nobody else to blame." But here comes the first promise of God. He says, "You know what? I am going to cause a situation to occur. And you are going to be able to attack my seed, but my seed is going to end up crushing your head." Now, the seed that he's talking about is the Redeemer, Jesus. But it's the very first promise that God gave us. And you know something about God? Y'all might have figured this out, but I'm going to tell you anyway. And he don't never go back on his promises.
That's right.
That's right.
The Bible says like this. It says the promises of God are yes, and so be it. So if he said it's going to happen. So if he says, "I'm going to provide you with a Redeemer," guess what you got? You got a Redeemer. But what if I've done? You got a Redeemer. But what? You got a Redeemer.
Hallelujah.
God, because of who he is,
Yes.
he says, "Whatever I speak will not return to me empty. It's going to accomplish what I sent it out to do."
Amen.
And I said all that to get us to our sticky note for today. I think it's a pretty simple one, but y'all let me know. Did it come up? No. Oh, see. The sticky note for this week is this. Despite appearances, God's promise will come to pass.
All right.
It don't matter what it looks like.
It don't matter.
God's promise is going to come to pass.
Hallelujah.
It don't matter what you did, what you done, or what you going to do. As long as you use the strategy that God has given you, which is 1 John 1:9, that if we commit a sin, that if we confess it to him, that he's faithful and just to cleanse us of that sin, to forgive us of that sin, and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. So despite appearances,
Yes.
God's promise will come to pass. Despite appearances, God's promise will come to pass. Despite appearances, God's promise will come to pass.
Thank you, Lord.
So this has a little thing on there I want to challenge you with. There are so many promises that God gives us. But to me, the first promise is the most important one. Genesis, the 3rd chapter. When he said, "I'm going to send someone that you'll be able to bruise his heel, but he will crush your head
Oh, yeah.
and have victory."
Thank you.
And guess what? That's Jesus. And guess what? He our brother. He in our family. So we all good. You know what I'm saying? It's all good. It's not a problem because he's on our side. Let's pray.
Thank you, God.
Father, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for just an opportunity to understand your love, God, is just sometimes unfathomable. We just can't really see how much you love us. But we understand that within love sometimes comes correction. So, Father, give us the awareness to know that your correction will come, but it does not leave us stranded. That your correction may have to be given, but it does not mean that you have forsaken us. Because you said that you only chasten those children that you love. So we thank you for the chastening, even though we won't like the moment, but we know in the end that your promise will come to pass. So we thank you and honor you for it, Father, and we just bless you for an opportunity to journey through Amos, to understand that it's not much different today than it was back then. But the significant event is that Christ has redeemed us already. We thank you and honor you for it all. In your Son Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.